a sweet, fudgy, and chocolatey treat, we are going to make brownies. And you can see here that the ingredients are super duper simple for this process, and a lot of these things are things you're going to have laying around your kitchen anyway. We start with 1/2 of a cup of butter that is melted and hot. I will give the metric measurements in the description of the video for those of us following along in Europe. I've got 1 tablespoon of any kind of cooking or vegetable oil. I'm using sunflower oil today. You could use coconut, you could use olive oil. It's not going to change your brownies. We need 1 1/8 cup of granulated sugar. We need 2 large eggs at room temperature. We need 2 teaspoons of vanilla, which I haven't measured out yet, but that's why I've got my spoon and my vanilla here. We need 1/2 cup of flour, 1/2 cup of cocoa powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I've actually put those into the same bowl right here, and I'm going to mix them together in a moment. And then finally, we don't technically need this according to the recipe that I've been using, but I'm going to do a little science experiment today, and I've put 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder in there because I actually like a slightly more cakey brownie instead of like super dense, super soft, and kind of mushy. Now, the last thing I'm going to say before we get into mixing our brownie batter, you have to prepare a brownie pan really carefully for baking because brownies, because they're so fudgy, they stick a lot. So I wanted to show you my prepared pan. You see here baking paper. You see shiny stuff. What I've done is I've taken 2 strips of baking paper and laid them on top of each other to cover almost the entire pan. And I sprayed this pan with a no-stick cooking spray before I put the paper in and after I put the paper in. Brownies stick really bad, so you want to do everything you can to make sure you can get the brownies out of the pan when you're done. So now it's time to mix our brownie ingredients. So as we have done with our other baking recipes, we're going to start by creaming the fats and the sugar. So our butter, our oil, and our sugar. I'm going to attach the paddle to my big stand mixer, but you can also use a hand mixer to do this. We're going to start by adding our sugar to the bowl, and then we add our hot melted butter, and then finally we add our oil. Now this will not take very long to cream together. We're just looking for something smooth and very well mixed. So less than a minute. We start on low and then we kick it up to medium. Now it's time to mix in the eggs and the vanilla extract. This is going to be a little bit more tricky. We're going to have to mix the eggs and this mixture for a minute or more because we're actually looking for it to change color and texture. So I'm going to crack my eggs in. Whoa. There's 1. There's 2. And we can't forget to add our vanilla extract. 1. And 2. Again, we're going to start on low and we're going to mix this on medium for at least a minute. So we start on low though. So now if we look at the texture of our forming batter, look at how light and it looks really fluffy. And that's exactly what we want it to look like. And we're not going to use the mixer anymore. This is actually super important because if we overmix brownies, then they won't be fudgy at all. They'll be more like chocolate cake, which is fine. If we want to make chocolate cake, let's make chocolate cake, but we're making brownies. And now, I had taken a moment while this was mixing off camera to just stir all my dry ingredients together with a fork. I'm going to sprinkle these in here. And then I'm going to fold the dry ingredients into the wet ones, and I'm only going to do this long enough to get the dry stuff wet. I just don't want to see any more dry stuff. I'm not going to mix any more. If there's lumps, it's fine. You know what? I think we're done. So you can see it did not take long at all. Now it's time to put this in our brownie pan. I'm just going to set that carefully down, scoop this over. Now before I started mixing anything, I preheated my oven to 350 degrees, or I think that's 175 degrees Celsius. So my oven is already ready, and all I need to do is pour this into my brownie pan. You want to make sure you get all the batter in. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is just spread this evenly in the pan. You can do that using your spatula, or if you remember the tool that I used, my special decorating knife in chocolate cake, you could use that too, but it's not super necessary for something this small. That's looking pretty good. So the last thing we're going to do before we put it in the oven, tap it on the counter. That's going to get any air bubbles to come to the surface and make our brownie nice and dense. I'm also going to do that about halfway through baking to get rid of some more of the air bubbles that have formed. So this needs to bake for about 45 to 50 minutes on normal conventional oven settings. So at about 20 minutes, you're going to take it out, tap it on the counter, and put it back. Brownie. So here we have our fully baked, hopefully, brownie. So what we have to do is we have to let these cool completely. Not 10 minutes, not 30 minutes, completely, before we try and gently lift the brownie using the paper from the pan. We can set it on a plate and then try to cut it. So I baked this for 45 minutes. Hopefully it has done its job, but I'll see you once it's fully cooled down. Alright, moment of truth. Did our brownies cool enough and did they bake enough? We shall find out. So what you want to do is lift, and that might take a little effort because when the no stick spray has cooled as well, it can actually stick a bit to the bottom of the pan. You lift up with the parchment paper, the baking paper, and then just set that down on a cutting board or a plate or something like that. And I'm just going to get our pan out of the way. But hey, looks like not much stuck, so that's a win. Now all that we're going to do is just make sure that the baking paper can lie flat. The knife I like to use is actually a really big one because it means I can make a single cut and I don't drag through the brownie, because if these are nice and fudgy like we think that they are, then you'll take off chunks of brownie. Now what I'm doing is actually called scoring, and I'm just making marks where I want to cut so that I've got nice evenly sized brownies. Delicious, fudgy, gooey brownies. Enjoy.